In this class, we'll do many scientific experiments, and we'll follow the scientific method, which I'm sure you've learned before. So you're going to start by identifying a problem, and you'll state that problem in the form of a question. After that, you're going to research the problem and try to find out what experiments have been done before and what previous data exist. Once you've done that, we'll design an experiment and form a hypothesis to try to answer the problem. So the hypothesis is in the form of a statement, and the problem's in a form of a question. After performing the experiment, you'll analyze the data, present it in a data table, perhaps a graph, and also present your observations in the form of pictures. Finally, you'll draw conclusions at the end of the experiment. After performing a scientific experiment in the scientific community, the first thing you want to do is publish your results. And you're going to publish those results in a peer-reviewed journal. And what peer review is when other scientists read your results, read your conclusions, and give you critique on how accurate they believe those results and conclusions are. If they are accepted by many and the experiment is performed many times receiving the same results, a scientific theory can be formed. For example, the theory of evolution. If the scientific results can be proven to be true over and over again, then it would be called a scientific law, such as the law of thermodynamics. A paradigm shift is what we call when a major idea or a major theory is proven to be incorrect. So an example of that would be the theory of geocentric model of the solar system, where Earth was believed to be the center of the solar system, when in fact it was proved later that the sun is the center of the solar system. So that would be an example of a paradigm shift. Your textbook highlights a controlled scientific experiment that was carried out in New Hampshire with the Hubbard Brook, and it's called the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest. And this scientist, Herbert Borman, wanted to show the effects of deforestation on the ecosystem. So he left one area of the forest completely unaffected, and the other one was clear-cut. And he studied the effects on the total ecosystem, the effects on the brook, the lake, the soil, and the overall air and soil quality in that region. And these are his results. So look at the two graphs, and what do you notice is dramatically different between the deforested region of the brook and the one that was undisturbed? There's a major difference in the level of nitrates in the water, and so he showed that when the area is deforested and clear-cut, the nitrates will increase in the water. And after his experiment, we went to further study what effects that has on the water, and that leads to a process called cultural eutrophication, which we'll study later in this course. And what that is that's a growth of algae in the water that robs all of the other native plants of their resources. Let's review the levels of organization. So all organisms are composed of cells, and you probably know from your biology class that organisms are made up of organ systems, which are made up of organs, which are made up of tissues, which are made up of cells. Each cell contains a nucleus, and inside that nucleus are going to be chromosomes made of DNA. Every chromosome contains the information on how to make all the proteins in the body, which are the building blocks for enzymes, hormones, and structural proteins throughout the body. Of course, all matter is made up of atoms and molecules. This is a picture of the carbon atom, and we know that there are many different kinds of elements that make up all forms of matter. The four most common elements in living things are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. They form different compounds and molecules. As you know, organic molecules contain carbon, and we have four major categories of organic molecules: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. We'll discuss all of those throughout the course. Ions are atoms that have lost or gained electrons, and they can form ionic compounds. They're going to have a positive or negative charge. And pH is one of the measures of hydrogen ions. So a hydrogen atom that has lost an electron is measured by pH. These are the major compounds that we'll study in this course. Sodium chloride is the main salt found in the oceans. Carbon monoxide is a poisonous gas that is produced when things are burned, such as fossil fuel and biomass. Carbon dioxide and methane are major greenhouse gases. As we'll study climate change, those two will come up over and over again. Glucose, of course, is a source of energy for all living things, and water makes up most of the surface of the earth, as well as the greatest percentage of any compound in living things. Hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide and sulfuric acid are all formed when fossil fuels are burned, particularly gasoline. We'll study sulfuric acid along with nitric acid when we talk about acid rain. The other nitrogen compounds listed here are all important parts of the nitrogen cycle, and we'll study those more in depth when we get there. In environmental science, we have two forms of matter. We have high quality and low quality. High quality is a very useful natural resource because it's easy to extract and receive usefulness from it. Low quality matter is very difficult to extract, and so it's considered a much more difficult source of a natural resource. So for example, here you see coal versus the coal power plant emissions. Salt, actually ready to use in its form, versus the salt that's found in water. You would first have to extract the salt from water before you could use it. An aluminum can is a high quality matter because it's already in the form that we need to make another can, whereas the ore has to actually be cleaned, smelted, and then melted into a can. So these are some of the ions that we'll discuss in the course, and we've already mentioned some of them, such as sodium and chloride. Hydrogen ions being measured by pH. Hydroxide ions are measured by pOH, the opposite of pH. Nitrates and phosphates will come into play when we talk about fertilizers, and sulfates and aluminum ions and calcium ions are all different ions that plants need and utilize in different forms. We have the ways that matter can change. We have physical change, which is when it changes from a state of matter, such as going from gas to liquid or liquid to solid. And then we have chemical changes, which is when we have a chemical reaction that actually changes the composition of a molecule. Lastly, we have nuclear change, and one example of nuclear change is radioactive decay. And that's an example here. This is a naturally occurring phenomenon when you have an isotope that loses particles, such as an alpha particle or a beta particle, and it gives off energy in the form of gamma rays. So that's used in radiation, and that's what you're going to find when you're talking about carbon-14 dating. This next type of nuclear change is called nuclear fission. That's fission. That is what's used when we have nuclear energy for nuclear power plants to produce electricity. One example of a radioactive element used for nuclear fission is uranium-235. And a neutron is shot at the nucleus of that atom, and it causes it to split apart into smaller nuclei, and that releases a lot of energy. That energy is then used to heat water, and that water boils, spinning a turbine, producing electricity. So that is nuclear energy. Our third type of nuclear change is nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion takes two lighter nuclei, fuses them together, which releases a lot of heat. You can see there 100 million degrees Celsius and tons of energy. It is hoped that nuclear fusion will be the source of electricity for us in the future, but right now it is still too volatile to be used on a large scale. There are labs all across the world testing nuclear fusion because it does not produce any nuclear waste, which is the case with nuclear fission, and it is a lot less dangerous if we can harness it appropriately. So that might be our energy source of the future. We'll just have to wait and see.